Do you feel like you've lost that spark of hope? I'm your host, Danielle Zapchenk, and thanks for listening to the Parable Podcast. Joining me is Arizona Baton Pass event speaker and author, Megan Musharbash. Megan discusses how she was searching for a spark of hope in a wilderness season.
And sometimes I have to physically say, Lord, I take this weight off of my shoulders, whatever it is, and I'm going to lay it at your feet and wait. And I'm physically going through the act, and I'm saying it, I'm speaking it as an act of trust and faith. Lord, I give this to you.
Here's my conversation with Megan Musharbash. Well, I am so thrilled to continue our collaboration with our friends at the Baton Pass. As you know, they exist to connect communities, individuals, and empower overcomers to share their stories in such a powerful way that really brings hope and healing and radical restoration. And they're all about stories, which is, as you know, my jam. So in the previous episode, you heard from Whitney Mallory, who is the Central Illinois leader. And today we are so excited to chat with Megan, who is going to be at Hope in the Desert, which is the April 7th event for Arizona. So Megan, thank you so much for being on the Parable Podcast.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I'm excited to be here.
How long have you lived in the Arizona area?
So I have been in Arizona since 2012. Obviously, you can probably tell by my accent, I'm not from here, but I was born in California. I actually moved back to England when I was 2 and then spent sort of split time, summers with my dad, and then went to school and grew up in the UK with my mother.
Did you like that juxtaposition of being in the US, but also being in England? I
actually really do. I feel very blessed because it was only really recently that I realized the perspective that it opened me up to. Some people say, are you more English? Are you more American? And I don't feel either, if I'm completely honest. I don't feel like I can fully identify with the way people are in the UK and the way that people are here. So I'm kind of in between. I don't know. Maybe I'll just call it like this. I'm a citizen of heaven, and that's it. There you go.
I love that. And you're uniquely you. I think you don't have to be defined by that. That's amazing. Yeah. Megan, do you have any hobbies that maybe people don't know about, or hobbies that you wish you had more time for?
Hobbies. Horse riding is a big hobby of mine. Grew up horse riding, competing. I love that. My some family here have horses. We get to ride occasionally. I do enjoy a little chess, not going to lie. My 6-year-old just started taking chess classes and he's really into it. And so he's doing amazing. And then piano as well. Okay. We just started doing piano lessons again, which we are loving. And then I also enjoy writing. I shared with you, I've written a couple of books. And so that I really enjoy too.
When did the passion for writing begin for you? Was that from a young age, or is that something that was cultivated later in life?
You know, it's funny. It actually was. So I remember the Lord took me back to memories of when I was a kid, and I used to write poems. And I remember a very distinct, it's funny how you only have, my memory is kind of limited of when I was a kid for lots of reasons, but I remember writing a poem and sending it to this place in the States. And I did it when the internet first came out, so I don't exactly remember what it was for. But they loved the poem and they said they wanted to put it in a book and publish it. But I don't all remember what happened. I don't think it ended up happening because I wasn't able to do the next steps. But I remember receiving a letter in the mail about that. So I never thought I would write. My dad was an author. He wrote 4 books. My sister is an author. She writes, but I never thought it was in for me, but it's something that how do I put it? I'm being obedient to the writing process. Yeah. I do enjoy it. It's a discipline sometimes to sit down and actually do it.
And also depending on what the subject is, what you're working on. I mean, if you're working through things or trying to really figure out the right words that impact the reader, I mean, that's a lot of work. There's a lot of energy that goes into that.
Yes.
Megan, what would you say like you're most passionate about these days?
Most passionate about the Lord and my family, my kids.
So tell me a little bit about your kids. How old are they?
I have a 6-year-old boy and a 3-year-old boy who are full of energy and they keep me extremely busy. And they're the best thing that honestly ever happened to me. I've grown so much since I became a mother. It wasn't something I ever thought I would be. Even getting married and having a family, that's not something that I, as a young girl, really aspired to do. But the Lord had other plans for me, and it was almost like, I know what's good for you. I know what's best for you. And so he just surprised me with these amazing gifts that I never knew I ever wanted. And it's crazy to even say that, because I walked through so much trauma in my life. I think that really impacted, my perspective of life and what life was really about. And so God had other plans.
He always does, doesn't he? Megan, what would you say is something that, even though that they are gifts that have surprised you, what is something that your children have been teaching that you've learned about yourself as now being a mom?
Patience and love, I would say, are the biggest things. And I'm sure any mother out there can relate to that. But having this unconditional love, but also this increasing love that grows within you over time. Of course, patience. I was a little bit of an impulsive person before, just a tad, but they've taught me a lot of patience and to, even in teaching and educating them, to have patience and wait for things. And that's twofold because, with my youngest, who has some developmental delays and things, I'm really walking out patience in seeing those things come to fruition, the promises that are on his life that were spoken before he was born, which is actually part of my story today. I'll share a little bit shortly. Waiting and being patient for the things that God has promised. Yeah. And that's really hard as a mother to see, your child in a deficit or what you believe is, and you're powerless to really do anything about that.
I can't wait to hear more about that. Before we jump into your story, I'd love to know, what has it been like attending any of the previous Baton Pass events? Have you ever experienced events like that? Is that something that's new to you? What was that like for you?
So I hadn't really attended anything like that before, I would say. Our church is an amazing church, though. We have events and things, but nothing to that level. Mm-hmm. They're very special. And the vulnerability that I've seen come from the women sharing their stories is not only so freeing and healing to them, but also to the people in the audience who can really relate. And then it kind of has this spiral effect where it just creates a space of vulnerability for them to come out and share their stories and get healing. And it just has this, domino effect that ripples out. And that's how, this has continued on, really, I think, and will continue on. I think it's going to be a bigger ministry than Angela anticipates because of come to so many people through it.
Yeah, the word that stands out to me is vulnerability. And I love it when women can just let down their walls. And I know that it takes time and patience even to get to that place, and also to be willing to share that in front of another group of women. But when that happens, there is such like a unique perspective and a recognition to say, oh, you had that similar story too. I didn't know that anyone else has, and it makes you feel like you're not alone. Maybe it's not exact, but there are those pain points that we all have as women as we walk along this life with Jesus. So, Megan, I am super excited to see how this parable story connects and also to hear more about it. So why don't you go ahead and share it with us?
Absolutely. And I'm excited. So I'm going to be sharing this at the Baton Pass too in great detail, but really, I think it started, I was saved in 2018, and from then on, I had a radical encounter with the Lord that was profound, and a visitation from him, and it changed my life. It literally, when the Bible says the scales are removed from your eyes, it couldn't have been more true. And so it was a fast track from there, really. But I'd also been through a lot of things in my life. It felt like there was one thing after another, after another, after another. And after I got saved and I came to know the Lord, things just started to make sense. But it wasn't until 2020 I got pregnant with my second Asher. And I went through a wilderness season. Mm-hmm. And I didn't know it was a wilderness season, of course, at first. But when I was 38 weeks pregnant with him, I got COVID and double pneumonia. And I was very, very sick. I had a high fever, in and out of the ER, couldn't barely breathe, couldn't walk, was really, really sick. It was a scary time. We had the pastors coming to the house praying over me and things, and it was scary. And so because my first son was early, he was 4 days early, I thought, oh my goodness, how on earth am I ever going to give birth? I can't even breathe. So 3 weeks passed, lots of prayer, lots of resting, I was in bed pretty much for 3 weeks straight, other than going to the hospital to be checked and managing the fever. It came down. Asher cruised in a little late, actually, 2 weeks late, but thank God he did, because I couldn't have done it otherwise. And he was born on December 30th, which is my mother's birthday. And it's also the day that I got baptized 2 years prior with my husband, and we dedicated Noah on that same day. And December 30th is actually the day that my husband left Canada and moved to the US. So December 30th, I know the Lord works in mysterious ways and dates, but I believe it's a way that he signifies newness and new life, and also his promises. Mm-hmm. So he was born, and then of course the sleepless night began. So when he was 3 days old, I was back in the ER. I got worse because I wasn't sleeping, and I got really, really, really sick. There were COVID people everywhere in the ER. They said, you can't bring your baby in here. And I said, I'm breastfeeding this child. Nothing is going to stop me. I couldn't do it with my first, and I'm determined to be this child's life source. Even though I'm barely making it, I was determined to do that. And so I brought him in. Thank God he didn't get sick. He was a very quiet baby, very happy, just slept, ate. He was a dream child. He was very different than my first. My first had colic, cried a lot, didn't breast. It couldn't be any more different, which was prophesied over him. So I continued, the healing of the COVID, but then other things kept coming up, and I ended up developing something called POTS and dysautonomia. I ended up developing sticky blood disorder. I ended up having all these symptoms that got progressively worse and worse as the months came on. I couldn't sleep at night. Everyone's asleep, the baby's sleeping, and I'm awake and I can't sleep. So I went to see a neurologist. I went to see a blood specialist. because I had all of these problems developing and nobody knew what was going on. And I was praying, really pressing in. And I remember in April, so he was born in December. In April, one morning, I sat at the table in the dining room and I opened up my Bible and I did Bible roulette. And I said, God, I have to hear from you right now. I have to hear from you right now. I was desperate. Mm-hmm. I opened up my Bible, took me straight to John 11:4. This sickness will not end in death, but will be to glorify my son, Jesus. And I held on to that. This was 4 months in now. This was my first spark of hope. Mm-hmm. I began praying and seeking God in a way I never had before. And I was on my knees praying every day for God to heal me. I began crying out, Lord, if I could only touch your cloak. I mean, I was literally putting the Bible, what it says in the Bible, into practice. I was doing what it said to do. I wasn't just reading it and then going away in hope. I was doing what it said. I held my hand over the Bible every morning, as Derek Prince did when he was sick. And I said, I take this word as my medicine. And I imagined myself taking a pill as I read the word every morning, as though it were my medicine and it was going to heal me. In July, my husband and I were praying, and he said, let's get on our knees right now and let's talk to God. And I'd already been diagnosed with some stuff at that point. And as we were praying, he said, 9. And I said, what do you mean 9? And he goes, I'm seeing number 9. And I said, okay, what does that mean? He says, I don't know. And I said, September. And he goes, I don't know. I said, September. He says, I don't know. And the Lord began to talk to me. I grabbed my Bible, the one that's actually right there, and I opened it up on the only blank page in the Bible that was opposite the beginning of Daniel, which I didn't realize it all comes together. Believe it or not, Daniel is Asher's middle name. So I write down all of the things that the Lord's telling me. All of these things. He starts pouring out all the things I need to do, and I write down the dates at the end of July. And the Lord is going to heal me in September. I'm going to be fully healed in September. August comes and I go to my neurologist. This is when I get diagnosed with the POTS and the dysautonomia, and I have to start taking salt and blood thinners and all these types of things. And it really does remain a mystery to even them too. They don't know what the cause is. They said, well, probably just have long COVID, and we just have to wait this out to see what happens. Now, the other part to this is my husband had come to me, I want to say maybe in June, and he had said something to me that I pushed away. And he said, Megan, have you ever considered that your breast implants could be making you sick? And I said, no. Meanwhile, we were aware that his sister had actually had lupus and had other autoimmune issues, and she'd had them removed, and she got well again afterwards. So we already knew that had happened, but I couldn't relate the two at the time. I said, no, I've not had any issues with them. I've had them for almost 14 years, whatever. However, at the end of August, actually, I think it was the 1st or the 2nd of September, he came to me again and he said, Megan, I believe it's your breast implants. And it was in that moment that I said, okay, I'm willing to look into this if this is really what you want. I'm like, I don't know that you're going to like what I look like when I have them taken out. I've had them for a long time. I've breastfed. And he said, Megan, I don't care. I just want you healthy. And it was at that point that I was like, I don't care what I look like. I just want to be well. I want to be able to take care of my children. I want to be able to play with them, to go out and live a normal life. I couldn't go anywhere. Make plans. I couldn't do anything. And we're 9 months in at this point. So I started looking for a surgeon to have a appointment. In the meantime, I'm praying. I'm like, Lord, is this it? Is this it? And I kept feeling towards it was. In the meantime, his sister sent me this group on Facebook that at the time had a couple 100,000 followers that was called Breast Implant Illness, BII. And I started reading all of these stories and I was like, this sounds like me. This sounds like me. So I started to get excited and have hope that this could be it. Once they had them removed, they all got well again, almost immediately. So I finally found a surgeon where I could actually get a reasonable time of appointment that wasn't months away, because every single day I was in tears. I found an appointment that was 2 weeks away. And I said, okay, if we do go ahead with the surgery, how long does it take in order to then have the surgery after the initial appointment? They said about, 4 to 6 weeks. And I'm thinking, I don't know how I can go on another 4 to 6 weeks like this. The day before my consult was September 20th. The day before my consult, I was in the bathroom. I got out of the shower and I started crying. And I was on my knees crying. And I said, Lord, I can't go on like this. I don't know if this is it or if it's not it. But I'm going to ask you this one thing. If this is meant to be and you want me to explant, you want me to take these out, Father, I pray that this be the surgeon, and by some miracle, within the next 7 days, I have this surgery. I got up, I got on, and the next day I went to the appointment and everything went well. He was an awesome surgeon. And I said, okay, scheduling, let's do it. And he said, okay, this is when we're looking at a couple of months. And he said, we have to do COVID testing and this and the surgery and all these things, right? And I said, okay, I understand that. Do you have a cancellation list? Can I be on your cancellation list so I can get on sooner? And he said, yes. However, the COVID testing makes it very difficult because you have to provide a negative test 3 days before your surgery. And it has to be, I think he said, a PCR test. It was the one that took longer.
Yeah.
But okay. And he goes, let me give you an example. If it wasn't for the COVID testing, he said, look, I have 3 surgeries tomorrow afternoon. And one of them canceled because she tested positive for COVID and she's not even sick. But because of the testing, I can't do her surgery. So he said, if it wasn't for the testing, I could do it tomorrow. And I said, is there any way that they would accept a rapid test just by, and he goes, I highly doubt it. And I said, well, can you ask them? Because it wasn't the surgery center. So the assistant who was in there with us, she goes, yeah, I'll call him right now if you want. They were totally just expecting it to be a no. She goes out and I get on my phone and I'm texting my church, like some of the prayer team. I'm like, just pray right now. It could be it, We were aware of what was going on. And so she came back in and she said, yeah, they would actually accept a rapid test. The surgeon turned to me and he said, if you can get me a negative test today, I'll do yours tomorrow.
Wow.
And I said, okay, all right. So we did the pre-op appointment and everything. I left. I drove straight to a drive-through center because that was, back in when it was COVID, what was going on. Went through. An hour later, I got a text saying your test is negative. I sent it over to them and they said, all right, we're scheduling for tomorrow. The next day, I went into surgery and I had them removed.
Wow. Megan, was the BEI over? Was that what you had in that moment?
The breast implant illness, the BII, yes. So the most amazing thing about it is when the women would say in their stories, I felt better almost immediately. And they said the first thing you notice is the whites of your eyes get brighter again. So I started taking pictures. So I took a picture the day that they said they would do the surgery the next day, and then the day of the surgery, so I could compare. When I woke up from the surgery, I had more energy, and I just come around general anesthesia. I went home, I wasn't tired, and I had chronic fatigue syndrome, so I was always tired, always. Just getting out of bed, getting up from the couch. I had energy. My husband's like, you need to go and rest. I've got drained and everything. I take pictures of my eyes. Immediately, he says, you look different. The next day I wake up, I slept, which I wasn't sleeping. I was getting up 8-9 times a night to use the bathroom. Couldn't sleep, insomnia, night sweats, all of it. You name it. I had over 40 symptoms. The next day I get up, my friend came to help me with Asha because my husband had to work. And she goes, you need to be resting. I had energy. I was up walking around doing things. I already felt 50% better from before I went to surgery. I couldn't believe it. I was like, I knew that they said this could happen, but I was almost kind of like doubting it in my mind, like skeptical, like, am I just going to start feeling worse again? When am I going to start feeling worse again?
Yeah.
And I never did. Within a month, my husband and I went on a trip to California to a wedding, to his friend's wedding, and I couldn't believe it. There was no way I could have gone before. At that point, a month later, I was almost 80% healed. 2 months after the surgery, I went back to my hematologist and to the neurologist. They could not believe the difference in my blood, and then they retested my blood, and the sticky blood disorder that put me at high risk for blood clots came all the way down to on the cusp of negative. And from then on, I was just feeling better and better and better every day.
What a season, Megan. I mean, gosh, such a roller coaster of emotions, because you, not only were you bringing life into this world, you're dealing with COVID and then the multitude of symptoms and just really like the questions that are circling your mind day in and day out of wondering, what is this? What is causing this? And ultimately just kind of like, I'm sure you felt like, why, right? Share with me a little bit. You said you were on the ground, sometimes crying on your knees, in a wilderness season. Were you ever angry with God?
I was frustrated, but I wouldn't say I was ever angry at God. I don't know that. I mean, I've been frustrated many times. It's really hard to depict this with your relationship with God. It's like, in the midst of all of the trials and in the midst of everything, I still trusted him. And I know I had to work through a lot of things. There was the spirit of death that was trying to just constantly come upon me. You're going to die. You're not going to be able to take care of your children. This is going to happen to you. This is going to have tormenting spirits of fear. And there's more that happen afterwards as far as like spiritual deliverance. Actually, it was happening kind of in the midst of it. And I got healed not only physically, but spiritually as well at the same time, with a multiple of other things that happen again, which is a lot of it's in the book because it's too much detail to explain in a short amount of time. But there was so many things that God was doing, and God did heal me in September. He said 9, and I trusted that what he said was true because I'd in the past say I'm going to do this, and I'd seen him do it. And so that little bit of hope I held on to. I grabbed it and I said, okay, I trust you.
Yeah, you said that a couple times, like that sparked hope in you. I mean, and it's just like you just need a spark sometimes, depending on the season that you are in. For somebody who is desperately looking for that spark of hope in their life, what encouragement would you give them when they just feel like the weight is on their shoulders right now?
I would say pour out to God no matter what you're going through, because he understands. And he meets us in this place of peace. He meets us in this place of love. His presence hovers over us. His spirit literally hovers over us. It says, I forget the exact address, but, he says, blessed are those who are poor in spirit, blessed are the meek. I think of that verse because he meets us in the times when we are at the low. He says, when you are weak, then you are strong in me. And it couldn't be more true. In my most weakest and darkest times, he's met me. And I've cried and wept with him and felt his love and his presence. I've just felt him there. I've felt him tangibly there. And I just it would encourage women to speak out what they're feeling to God, lament to God, cry out to him, and just say everything that they're feeling. And sometimes it's hard to really even be able to articulate our thoughts. But once it comes out of our mouth, it does something. We know our words are powerful, but it does something when it actually comes out, and God is able to kind of take it and do something with it. And it's a release. We literally are laying it down. And sometimes I have to physically say, Lord, and I do the action. I put my hands on my shoulders. I say, I take this weight off of my shoulders, whatever it is, and I'm going to lay it at your feet and wait. And I'm physically going through the act, and I'm saying it, I'm speaking it as an act of trust and faith. Lord, I give this to you.
Megan, earlier when you were talking about writing, you used the word obedient. And I think when we have to share stories, it is out of obedience, because we don't know who's listening on the other side or what they're going to glean from our own experience. Tell me a little bit more about like what obedience looks like and how that maybe has affected people that have heard parts of your story.
Obedience is an interesting word that I've been exploring with God over the last 2 years, and really instilling that fear of the Lord, and not in a fear that is, I'm terrified. It's more of a fear of being without him. And being obedient to God is something that he requires it, but at the same time, it's really for our own good, because it instills a position before God that enables us to really bless us richly. Because that very thing that he's asking us to, it's like that image. You ever seen that image of Jesus holding a massive teddy bear behind his back? And the little kid in front of him that has a little teddy bear. And he's like, if you would only trust me, you would see I've got so much more. And this little boy's like, this is kind of all I've got, this tiny little bear. And Jesus is like, I've got this massive teddy bear behind my back. It's all I'm asking for you is to you just trust me. And obedience is an ingredient to that trust, to instill deeper level of that trust in the Lord. And the world doesn't like that word. That it comes with submission to God. And again, that's another very unattractive word to the world, submission. Well, why should I submit to anyone? It's all about me. But God says, it's actually all about me. And if only we really understood that, it comes down to really understanding God, I believe. And then he can instill in us who he created us to be, because he made us to have a relationship with him. He made an order that works. And I found that when I resist the order, everything's in chaos. But when I'm obedient, it works.
Yeah, it is about the relationship. I just was doing the math in my head. And so this experience started for you in 2020, but you said in 2018, you started a relationship with Jesus. So, I mean, gosh, you're right. Like this spiritual transformation for yourself and what God was doing in your life. Tell me a little bit about what was the catalyst? You don't have to go into complete detail, but what happened in 2018 that launched you into this relationship with Jesus?
Oh, wow. Gosh, I have to try and really condense this. I wrote it in detail in the book, but I'll try and condense it. My husband had been praying for me for a long time. It wasn't that I was resistant, but I wasn't there. And that goes back to me just completely when I first met him. You know, I'm really happy for you in your faith that that's what you believe. I felt like some people really needed that in order for them to stay on track. They needed God. I always considered myself to be quote unquote spiritual, but I thought that Christianity was limited. I felt like people who believed in this specific God were very limited, and they were actually doing themselves a disservice by limiting themselves and their capabilities. When I say God transformed me, it's all glory to him because of what he did in my heart, and only he has the power to do that. But I remember asking my husband right before we moved actually into this house. We were in another house down the street when we had our first child. He was about 18 months at the time. I said, okay, I understand God, because I would read the Jesus Calling book in the morning sometimes, and I felt peace when I read it. And I was like, well, this is really nice. And I said, I get God, but why Jesus? Why are we praying to this man? Why don't we just pray directly to God? And I remember him trying to answer it, but he really couldn't. A week after that, we were moving into this house. I had to have an umbilical hernia surgery. When Noah was born, I had a big hole there, and we didn't realize I had a hernia. So I had to kind of have a very quick surgery there. I remember about to go to sleep, and I was really afraid of having surgery. I was terrified, actually. Before I went to sleep, I remember saying a prayer, and I said to God, I trust you, and I give you my life. That was it, before I went to sleep. When I came around from the surgery, I felt different. And as I'm laying in bed recovering, I started watching these videos. One of them was John Ramirez, who was an ex-Satanist, him turning from Satanism and having a radical encounter with Jesus. Another one was Carol Kornacki. She was an ex-witch. And I was interested because at the time I knew the spiritual realm very well. I'd had a lot of demonic things happen to me in my life, a lot of spiritual things happen to me, seen a lot of things. So that I accepted. I knew that was real. But then when I heard about what happened to them and Jesus, something in my spirit changed. And I can't tell you what it was. But later that day, I got up out of bed and I was saying, Jesus is Lord. My husband's dad, my father-in-law, was here from Canada at the time, helping me with Noah. And he was like, he's a Christian. And he was kind of looking at me like, she's not stopped talking about Jesus. I couldn't stop talking about Jesus. And my husband was even like, okay. Then the next night, I had a demonic attack in my sleep. And I was, you know the movie The Exorcist?
Yes.
I've not seen that since I was a kid. I don't know why I watched it as a kid, first of all. But all I kept playing in my mind was the little girl when she would go from a little girl to a demon, and I was being tortured. I started yelling out. I started having a panic attack. I couldn't breathe. I had chest pain. My husband ended up taking me to the ER because I was literally yelling out, no, stop, all this stuff. It was a crazy demonic attack. But I didn't know that at the time. I thought I was dying. So he took me to the ER, did tests. Everything was normal, fell asleep, woke up. We drove home as the sun was coming up. And I felt this freedom I'd never felt in my life. The next day, I was in my office. A worship song came on called Oceans Deep by Hillsong. And I didn't listen to worship. But all of a sudden, I fell to my knees on the floor and began weeping. And the Spirit of God came over me in the most tangible, incredible, I can't even describe it way. If you guys have felt the Spirit of God, you know exactly what I'm talking about. And in that moment, it lasted 25 minutes maybe. All I felt was love. The most overwhelming, consuming fire of love falling upon me of who he is, who he's always been, how he's never left me, how he was always with me, how much he loves me, how much I'm forgiven, how seen I am. And he just did this download of years and years of my life in an instant. And I was weeping and weeping and weeping and just me. My hands were up, reached out with the song that was playing. And I don't know if it repeated or what. It's quite a long song. I think the song itself was like 15 minutes because it was live, but it went into something else afterwards and I couldn't leave his presence. And in that moment, I knew who God was. I knew he was Jesus. I knew what he did for me. I knew who he was. I felt so not sorry, but I felt remorse for everything. I can't believe I walked without you for so long. I can't believe I didn't know you. I can't believe this is who you are. Like, it was just revelations after revelations. And almost immediately afterwards, he said, you're going to testify about me. I made a video, I put it on YouTube. And I'm like, I can't put this out, people, because at the time I was doing videos, people were thinking, you're crazy. She's turned into a Jesus freak now. But I had to be obedient. So I did it. As soon as I did that, he said, you need to get baptized. 2 weeks later, December 30th, it was by his Spirit saying, this is what I want you to do. And then I had a desire to read the Bible, and I read the Bible from cover to cover and read it every day since.
Wow, Megan, what a story. A couple things that stand out to me is one, the patience that your husband had, knowing and just praying for you continually, and just how God just like runs after us with reckless abandon and says, I'm for her. It's really beautiful. I'm grateful for your story. And I loved how you ended at just like how God is going to continue to use you to testify about the change and like the glory that is now in your life, and how we can have that. Anyone can have that if we just surrender to him, and then the hope that that's found in there. So Megan, gosh, thank you so much for your story. I'm excited to see what God is going to continue to do for you and not only your family. Yeah, you have such richness in your words and just power. So I'm grateful to hear your story today. Thank you so much.
Amen. Thank you so much for having me.
If people wanted to connect with you, how can they do that?
Social media, Instagram, Megan Musharbash, MEGAN_Musharbash, MUSHARBASH. Or my email is just megan.musharbash Musharbash@gmail.com.
Well, if you want to connect with Megan or attend the Baton Pass event on Sunday, April 7th, Hope in the Desert, Megan is going to be there sharing even more of her story. And plus, you can check out her book as well. There's so much to learn about you. And I think that's the beauty of stories. We have so much to offer this world, so much hope in each one of our stories. So Megan, again, thank you so much for being with us today.
Thank you, Danielle.
What a testimony from Megan. Just so grateful to have her continue to be able to share her story, especially at this upcoming event with the Baton Pass in Arizona. I'm grateful to partner with them for a few episodes and encourage all of us as overcomers to share our story. The Arizona Baton Pass event team would love to see you at Hope in the Desert is on April 7th in the Phoenix Valley if you happen to be in that area. If you would like to connect with Megan or get event details for this upcoming Baton Pass event, simply visit DanielleZapchenk.com for details. And here are 2 reflection questions from our time with Megan. Number 1, if you feel like you are currently in a wilderness season, I would continue to pray with an open heart and also open eyes so you can see sparks of hope from Him. Or possibly you need to reflect back on ways that how God has showed up. Number 2, what areas do you feel like God is calling you to have obedience in? If you're looking for more information on the Baton Pass or you'd like to hear more stories from some of the women, check out last week's episode with Whitney Mallory or episodes 60 through 62 and pass that on to a friend today. Also, a huge shout out to my gifted husband, Eric, for his editing expertise. That is going to do it for today. I'm grateful that you took the time to spend it with me. Remember, your parable showcases how every spark of hope has been God-given to you. I'll see you back again next week on the Parable Podcast.